I believe it's starting. Okay, now we are live, so people should be coming in. This is Dan and Chris from the Clinical Trials Guru, as well as DSCS, Sweat Equity and Investments. And I believe I have the Q&A feature turned on. Let me make sure that's turned on. So if you guys want to type in questions as you start getting on here, hopefully we have a good amount of people watching. This is also going to be recorded and uploaded to YouTube, right? So we're going to be talking about biz dev, business development, and are you going to close that door?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to be talking about business development, and I left the Q&A section open there so you can type in your question and we'll answer it. But it's all about how to get studies, okay? All about growing your business, your research clinic, your SMO, your CRO, although SMOs have gotten a bad rap over the last 5 years or so, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sponsors always ask, are you an SMO? I know sites that didn't know any better that said, yes, we are SMOs, and then they don't get the studies.
So why is it bad to be an SMO?
So I've done a video on this before, but some of them, and there are some good SMOs out there, but some of them took shortcuts when it came to quality of source data and training staff.
Mm-hmm.
So they got over leveraged to some extent, and it created some negative consequences. And then the sponsors basically said, well, any SMO now, we're just not going to deal with them.
Because you would think from the sponsor side, it'd be convenient to utilize an SMO. You have one centralized location,
right,
working on budgets, contracts.
On paper, it's a great idea.
Regulatory.
Yeah, on paper, it's a great idea. And then I guess when push comes to shove, and in reality, apparently not such a great idea. Although there still are SMOs out there that really do a good job as far as QA, quality assurance, training their staff. So there are some good SMOs out there, but for anyone watching, I don't even care if you are an SMO.
Don't market yourself that way.
Don't put yes on that box. And the way we do it at DSCS, we own a bunch of sites, but each site is independently owned, and each site is technically a different company.
So it's really not an SMO.
Right. So we have Chicago Clinical Trials, we have Continental Clinical Solutions, we have Global Clinical Trial, and we own a part of each of these, but each site is standalone. They work independently of each other. They don't even get the same studies necessarily. So they have different PIs, different specialists. So we got more people coming on here. Type in your questions, but we're going to be talking today about business development, how to grow your business, how to get more studies, and this primarily applies to research sites, but it can work for CROs as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some of our clients have been CROs, and we've been able to do some business development for them. So, okay, the first way of getting studies is the simplest way. Okay, you, the business owner or the site director, are the one that's going to be doing that, right? And if you're a startup, chances are you're going to be doing that as well as everything else, which we've talked about in past videos. So literally doing the business development, doing the patient recruitment, doing the PI recruitment, writing the SOPs,
possibly the
coordinating, data entry, dealing with monitors, everything. Okay, this is how it is when you start. Now, once you get revenue, you start outsourcing some of these tasks. Now, you got to go with what your strengths are, and you got to know yourself. And this is where self-awareness, one of my favorite topics, really comes in handy. You got to know, hey, are you a natural salesperson, or are you more of like a quality assurance person, or someone who's going to be managing the operations, or are you a contract and budget person, right?
Sure.
What are your strengths? Don't try to work on your weaknesses. Forget about that. You want to hire people to complement your strengths.
Well, I would say if you're working on a shoestring, though, it's very important that you're good at getting patients first and foremost.
Right. And most sites are working on a shoestring budget, especially the brand new ones.
I mean, unless you're relying 100% on the PI to provide patients. If you need to do some recruiting, That better be one of your strengths.
And you could never truly just rely on the PI. I would never do that.
Right.
I mean, you've got to be involved. So when you're a startup, here's a news flash for you. It's gonna be hard. Okay, it's not easy.
It requires some work.
Yeah, we have clients that hired us, and then we get them studies, and they say, "Hey, this is hard. These studies are not easy. We want the easy studies." Well, guess what? Those easy studies are not out there. Okay,
And if they are, they don't pay much.
Right. All right. There's a thing called supply and demand, and right now in May 2016, we are seeing a moderate increase in studies, and I think that's going to be picking up. But it's still a relatively low supply when looked at the macro picture of over the last 10 years, right? During the last economic boom in 2005, which is when I got started in research, we saw a huge supply of studies. Actually, sponsors were begging sites to take those studies.
Couldn't find enough sites.
Right. And we could then make demands like, hey, we want to get paid this amount for the budget. And this was before the Sunshine Act too, so things have gotten a little more complex. But I do think those days are coming back. But we can only deal in the present reality. And what the present reality and what the market is dictating is that we can't be picky about what studies we're taking right now.
Well,
right?
You can be a little bit picky, but
to some extent.
I mean, you're going to do a gynecological study and you're a neurologist.
Right. Yes. Okay. So if you can't do the study, obviously don't take it. But if it's a study you can do, but it's a little difficult,
right,
doesn't mean you shouldn't. You should decline it. Right. So, and again, you got to look at the resources you have. Do you have the staff, or is it just literally you doing everything? Then you do have to be a little more selective. I know we're going to actually get into this situation where we're opening another site. So we're always trying to expand and open new sites. We're going to get into a situation, I think, around July or August, where I will be the coordinator
for a while,
for at least 3 to 6 months, right? So I'm going to be picking,
hopefully not that long.
3 months at least.
Yeah.
I am going to be selective about which studies I take on because it's going to be me doing everything, right? But I'm not going to be selective to the point where it's going to be affecting the business, right? So let's say I've gotten 2 studies and I'm expecting 80% of our revenues to come from those 2 studies. And then I'm offered a 3rd study and I know the revenues are not going to be that great and it's going to take up 50% of my time.
Sure.
That's a situation where you will say no to the study. So, okay, back to getting the studies. So you can either do it all yourself, which is what many people do, but there comes a point in time where you've got to start picking what tasks you're going to do. And back to self-awareness, you got to know what your strengths are, okay? Some people's strengths are sales, but it is a bit of an oddity in this industry for a researcher's main strength to be salesmanship. It's just not the first industry those people gravitate towards, right? Sure. They'll gravitate towards real estate, they'll gravitate towards Wall Street, generally not clinical research, right? So you can do the sales yourself, maybe you're good at it, or you can hire someone to do it. This is called business development. They're also called site directors if you have them do more things than just business development. Some people have their coordinators do the business development, which I think is not a good idea because they need to be focused on the actual operations of the study. And if you're going to give them any extra tasks, it should be recruiting patients. So if you have them also help you get studies, you're kind of having them all over the place and not really focused.
Assurance at a risk.
You're putting QA at a risk, and you're not having them focus on what's actually bringing in revenue, which is the studies you currently have, getting patients in those studies, and then playing defense, meaning keep the FDA away, right? Now, business development is all about offense. This is future business. What are we going to get in the next 6 months? What revenues are we going to get in the next 6 to 12 months? And this, you don't want your coordinator necessarily doing this. So again, if you have questions, type them here. The first thing people generally do is hire a business development individual.
I would like to touch on one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
You put quality at risk now. It might benefit you now in the short term, but it's going to jeopardize your business in the long term. Because those studies in which the quality wasn't the greatest,
Right.
those sponsors will not select your site.
Right. Just like all those
In the
SMOs.
future.
Just like all those SMOs
Right.
that got put out of business, or
Right.
sponsors just refuse to work with them.
So it may make sense in the short term, but if you want your business to succeed, I wouldn't recommend it for the long term.
Right. So you need the coordinator to focus primarily on the operations and then QA. And then if your natural inclination as the owner or the site director is more of a QA type of personality, maybe you're a former monitor. We have so many current and former monitors that want to start their own
Yep.
sites and have started their own sites. And salesmanship is definitely not their thing. If you have a 5-minute conversation with most of them, you'll discover that right away.
Yep.
Right? But QA definitely is their thing. So for them, it wouldn't make sense to outsource QA. It would make sense to outsource business development.
That's right.
Right? So you can hire someone to do BD for you. You can hire an employee. You can train them. One of the things I've wanted to do for a while, and maybe we'll eventually do this at one of our sites, is hire commission-only business development, and then hire like 2 of them so that they can compete and say, hey, you get paid, but you'll get paid handsomely. Maybe the half of the advance payment. Typically, that's anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000 for every study that we get. Another option you can do. You may not get many people sticking around long, though, because it's going to be a lot of work with the rewards coming 6 months later, maybe. Right? Another option you can do is
you want to use that. If you want to use that method, you have to pay them hourly as well if you want them to stick around.
Right. So like a small salary and then this incentive on top of it.
Correct.
All right. Now, but that then becomes an employee.
Yeah.
Right. Much easier when it comes to, or much more difficult,
because there's a certain amount of learning curve to getting studies.
Right.
So if you bring somebody on to do this, they're not going to be successful for the first 2 months, regardless if they're new to it. And by the time they start learning it, they're going to get frustrated because they're not seeing any revenue if they're strictly commission. They're going to walk away.
Right. So what some sites have done is employed as an employee a business development director, and this person's job, and sometimes they give them like regulatory stuff to do as well, or contracts and budgets, because the regulatory is not that difficult, and then contracts and budgets, they're more naturally inclined to be that type of personality to be a finance person, right?
Budgets are similar. It's kind of sales.
It's salesy, right? There's a good amount of salesmanship involved. In fact, in a few hours, we got a conference call with a sponsor where we got to negotiate a budget. They're going to call and ask for justifications. I mean, and then I do BD as well. So those two go hand in hand.
Sure.
Right. So if you hire an employee to take care of business development for you, you're going to have to pay them. Right. Do you want to pay them a small salary and then put an incentive on top of it? Or do you just want to pay them like $4,000 or $5,000 a month? Right. And from your experiences, what have been their typical salaries for a good business development?
For a good person,
like a seasoned one,
right? That's experienced. You're probably going to pay $3,500. I mean, it depends on the market, but I would guess or speculate on average $3,500, $3,800
as a full-time BD person, right? Yeah, and I know some at especially at some of the phase 1 sites, they get paid $150,000.
Sure, much more,
right?
But the studies obviously are more lucrative, so it makes more sense.
The studies pay more, right? So what are the advantages of having an employee do this for you?
Well, time and energy. And as you kind of suggested, it may not be the strong suit of the owner, so you have somebody more inclined and able to produce in this job.
So most of these business development people, they typically go on clinicaltrials.gov in addition to having their own network of contacts. So ideally, if you are going to pay someone, and I think you have to pay them more than $3,500, but if you're hiring someone who already has a Rolodex, like a stacked Rolodex of contacts,
if that were the case, yes, more.
It'd be a lot more. It'd be like maybe double or triple.
What I'm referring to is somebody that just has experience on going on clinicaltrials.gov.
Okay.
Is familiar with the market, not necessarily somebody who has tons of contacts, can reach out to people. That's not what I'm referring to when I say $3,500 a month.
Okay.
No, in this case, I would at least 5, maybe 6.
Right. And some of them, like I said, to get 6 figures.
Sure. If you're bringing in phase 1 studies, yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay, so someone who's coming in with a Rolodex of contacts, yeah, they're still going to be going on clinicaltrials.gov, but the majority of the business that they're going to be generating for you is going to come from their contacts. Okay, now you are in a way at the mercy of this employee, right? Unless you have an internal system of keeping track of their contacts, which is why I've started recently experimenting with Salesforce, and we'll see how that goes. But if I were to hire an employee and I manage the Salesforce account, then all of their leads would be entered there. And if they decide to leave one day,
you at least have a
we
record.
Still have the contacts, right? And if you don't have any systems in place, this person can just take all their contacts with them, and then there go all your future studies, right? And then you're starting all over again. So definitely have systems in place if you're bringing in individuals like with stacked Rolodex. If not, then you're going to have them go on clinicaltrials.gov. And we're getting a question in here, but you're going to have to go on clinicaltrials.gov and have them literally map out all the studies that are appropriate for you, and then have those contacts put into some kind of system. And question, I read your LinkedIn article from a year ago, how to get more studies, with the portion on how to search clinicaltrials.gov. Can you give a little more detailed information on how to get yourself considered as a site to be added to the study? How to get yourself considered as a site to be added to a study.
You used to have an expression for this. Do you recall?
Fake it till you make it.
No. Dialing for dollars.
Dialing for dollars. Okay. So I guess, I'm assuming your question is referring to how to position yourself as a site when you're sending out emails on clinicaltrials.gov. So I would have, because one thing sponsors do care about is past performance and your metrics, right? So if it's an asthma study, they want to know how many previous asthma studies have you done? What phase were they?
Well,
how many you screened? How many you randomized? How many screen failed? How many finished? Right? You need metrics.
Not only that, but what they're asking, it seems to me, is it's not always blatantly obvious on who to contact at clinicaltrials.gov in regards to getting a study. This is where the dialing for dollars expression came from.
Right.
You have to first find who do I need to speak to even request this study.
Yeah, and they're saying yes, how to position yourself as a site. So it's a numbers game. And supply and demand, people just it's amazing how we learn this stuff in school and then we forget about it when we're out in the real world. Supply and demand is real. If there's little supply of studies and there's a lot of competition from sites, you're going to have to do a whole lot to stand out, right? And if there's a huge supply of studies, well, you're not going to have to do much except have an office, right? Have a clinic and demonstrate that you're going to be able to enroll subjects and follow good clinical practice and that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But in this market, I suggest you have some metrics in place. So if you have any previous studies you've worked on, you need to start putting an Excel sheet together, and the numbers don't have to be exact if you can't find the actual numbers. I would look at the actual numbers, but if you can't find those numbers, you're going to do some estimates and put them on an Excel sheet. Let them know, hey, these are our metrics of past performance for similar studies. Here's our metrics. If you don't have that going for you, let's say it's your first trial.
Well, they asked this on the feasibility question.
They asked that on the feasibility questionnaire, but prior to even getting that feasibility, just from pitching the sponsors from clinicaltrials.gov, just to get that feasibility questionnaire, it's kind of like a small victory in and of itself. I would say it's maybe half the battle, actually, just getting that feasibility. So to 20%. Get 20%. So to get to that point, what do? You either have metrics and you show them, or if you don't, then you focus on your strengths, right? Maybe your PI is brand new to research, but he's got 1 million patients in his database, right? A million's a lot, but like 100,000, right? Then you focus on that and you make that the focal point of your email pitch, right?
So how many feasibility questionnaires do you have to submit in order to have a site selection visit? Did you say 5?
5 or 6. Yeah, I was going to say 5 or 6.
So 20%.
And I think you need to send out 100 email pitches to get like 1 SSV in this market.
Sure.
right? That could change later. It could be 100 for 10.
100 might be a little high.
Yeah, 50.
Somewhere between 50 and 100.
50 to 100. So, I mean, focus on what your strengths are. Like if your PI doesn't have past experience with studies, but has a lot of patience, that's going to be interesting to the sponsor. And then focus on that. Make that the focal point of your email pitch or your follow-up phone calls. You've got to follow up. Follow-up is like huge. People still don't do it, right? After the email pitch, if you don't hear back, you call and you just bother them until you get a response, either yes or no.
Well, they're fairly good about responding though on the email pitch. They'll tell you right away if they're still searching for sites, or they're willing to add you as a backup if they need sites later on. They're fairly responsive in that regard. 80% of the time, you'll get a response from your email.
Right. So someone who doesn't have experience, but your metrics could be how many patients your doctor sees on a monthly basis at their clinic, and that might be interesting to the sponsor. And if you have an experienced coordinator, then you also make that the focal point of your email pitch. And if the coordinator has experience in those kind of studies, then you use metrics from that coordinator as well, because they're part of your site now. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you very much for that. Another option of getting studies is using study brokers, which I hate. I hate study brokers. I've used 3 in the past, and I'm not going to name names, but they were all equally bad and actually equally deceptive. So if you don't read the fine print in their contracts, it actually states, would you like to explain this part?
Well, it's key. It's always key in a contract to look at the fine print.
Right.
That's where the key and pertinent information is contained. And I think what you're referencing is typically it's you have to pay a percentage of your study budget regardless of patients enrolled. Typically, I don't know if that's true now of all brokers, because we've spoke to a couple of people recently that say that's not the case. But I don't. Maybe they didn't read the fine print.
So, and they can change things if it's not working, or if they notice they're starting to get a bad reputation.
Sure,
they can change their policies as well. But I'm using what I've dealt with in the past as example.
Experience.
And there are some brokers that won't charge you a finder fee, but they're going to have to get paid from somewhere, right?
Sure.
Whether it's from your advance fee, or whether it's a percentage of your study visits that you actually have conducted, or whether it's a percentage of the visits that you're contracted to enroll.
Contracted budget.
And let's say you don't. Let's say you're contracted for 10 and you only enroll 2.
And say completed patients 20,000.
Then you owe that broker
20,000 if it's 10%.
So you lost money on that study.
If you didn't enroll enough patients.
And that's exactly what happened to me twice. Lost money on studies. Actually, after we paid the coordinators and all the expenses associated with the trial and the broker, we lost about $5,000 on each study. Not a good way to run a business, right? This is why I stay away from brokers.
Not if you want to be successful, anyhow.
Another way is to hire consultants, right? And this is kind of where we started our consulting firm 2 years ago, helping sites who are trying to stay away from brokers. So you can pay someone like us. And the reason I created my consulting firm for business development for other sites and for CROs is specifically because I was looking for this when I was running my sites. And there was nobody I could find back then, right? The internet has greatly evolved since then. Social media has exploded. It's a lot easier to find these people now, maybe, but there's only a handful of these people out there, including us, right? So I actually, back in 2007, hired a consultant to help me with operations. And then I pretty much begged him after the first month of him fixing our SOPs and all that stuff. I told him, okay, I got this part now, but I need business development. I need help on that end. And he didn't want to do it. He had a Rolodex, but he didn't want to do it. And I said, I'll pay you. How much extra do I need to pay you for you to help me? He wouldn't do it. For whatever reason, he wasn't comfortable doing that. So I said, if there was a group out there that did this, I would hire them, pay them $2,000 to $4,000 a month. And that's exactly why we started our consulting firm. So we've been helping sites do business development, and we also negotiate their contracts and budgets for them, as well as a whole lot of other things. And what are the benefits of doing that?
Well, the biggest benefit is cost. If you were to hire, as we discussed earlier, if you were to hire somebody to fulfill this position at your site, you're going to pay a minimum of $3,500 a month, and at that, you might be able to get somebody with some experience, understands the industry, but they may not have the contacts. Where we come in is we have some contacts, we understand the industry, and we charge a lot less than $3,500.
And you don't have to deal with employees, so it sometimes could be quite difficult, and there could be some legal ramifications to firing employees.
Sure.
Right? There's also payroll tax you've got to pay. So there's a lot of things that, I mean, it's great to train people in-house and do that for you, but sometimes you want that freedom and the flexibility to be able to turn it off and on as a service, which is exactly what we provide. We don't even have, we can do month-to-month business development with clients. We prefer, and we have incentives for having a year-long contract. And you definitely get your value when you do that, but we can do month to month. So you can turn us on, turn us off when you don't need it, bring us back on. Those are some of the advantages I see when hiring consultants to help you out with your trials. So anything else you'd like to say as we're wrapping up?
Not in regard to that. Did we touch on all the different ways you can get studies?
Email pitches. Brokers,
yourself,
consultants, yourself, an employee.
Passively.
Passively. So explain that.
So after you've been in business for, what would you say, 2 years? How long? 2 years,
yeah,
maybe 3 years.
2 years ago.
2 to 3 years, I would say. If the previous studies that you worked on, you did a good job, quality was good, data was good, they will come back to you on any number of trials, the sponsors who you previously conducted studies for, and they'll ask you if you'd like to participate in a trial. Obviously, the best way to get a study, you're not paying anybody to get it. It's unexpectedly coming.
It's repeat business.
Yep.
Right. Every industry has this. It's just called repeat customers.
Yep.
Ours is no different. Our customers happen to be CROs and sponsors, and you get repeat business from them. Right. So yeah, that's the hard way, but also the most valuable way.
The problem is if you're a new site, you're 2 to 3 years away from this occurring.
And you need to get started now, ASAP, right?
Yep.
The other methods are, so email pitches, phone calls. You can actually find a lot of the decision makers on LinkedIn, although I wouldn't recommend spamming them on LinkedIn. I would recommend trying to engage with them somehow, providing them value. Here's a crazy idea. Free advice for anyone who wants to try this. Let me know how it works. Facebook ads, okay, you can now target people who work at companies. So you can target, let's say, Quintiles, right?
What's your ad going to be? I'm a study site.
No,
I need a trial.
No, that is not what. Thank you, Chris. That is exactly not what your ad is going to be.
So what
because
would the ad be?
People ignore that. So you're going to write something that a project manager would be interested in.
Okay, give me an
example.
Like
5 ways to discover that a site is full of crap at their site selection visit. Or, you can use a nicer headline than that. But 5 ways to tell an inexperienced site at a site selection visit and how to not get your monitors fooled.
Okay, so how do you tunnel this into getting a study?
It's definitely it's not a direct route, but it is a way to get noticed.
Sure, you might
people who work
dialogue this way.
Yeah, people who work for Quintiles are going to say, hey, they're going to forward this to their boss. They're going to say, hey, look what I found. Check it out. Hopefully it goes to your landing page where you have a blog where you discuss things that are important to sponsors and CROs that they'd like to hear. So figure out what they want to hear. This is an example. This is something I've been wanting to try for a while.
Sure, but people who are watching this webinar right now, or who will watch this later on YouTube, how many of them do you think have time?
Only one.
Or energy to do this?
From these 20 viewers we had live, maybe no one's going to do it. From the 100 more views we'll get on YouTube, I'm hoping for one person to try.
Yeah.
And if no one tries, I'll do it. just to see how that works. So you got to play around with it. A lot of this is figuring out what works, all right? And if you find out what works, and then you establish a dialogue with that sponsor, and then maybe that guy calls you and says, hey, I'm really interested in like what you had to say. Can you tell us more? That's a real problem sponsors are dealing with.
No, I understand.
How to weed out the bad sites from the good sites before you actually bring them onto the trial. You're providing them value in that case, right? So
I'm just trying to figure out how you siphon a study off of that. That's all.
You need to get them to your page, to your website,
and
right?
Just develop the dialogue and move on from there.
Awareness is like half of the battle in this situation.
Sure.
If they don't know your site from Joe Schmo's site, they don't know the difference, right? So now they do. Right? And now you have an opportunity to pitch them.
Sure, you have an ear now.
And it's not a cold pitch anymore. It's, hey, you know, I'm so-and-so from, I wrote this article. We had a dialogue. Just want to see how your site selection is going. And is there any way my site can possibly work with you? Do that 100 times.
Yep.
Right? Then you don't need consultants. It's hard, right? It's work.
As Rihanna says.
As Rihanna says, right? Which is why people like to outsource this stuff, because they don't have time to do all that stuff. But somebody will. Somebody's going to try it out, and we'll see if it works. I've actually been wanting to do this for a while. In fact, I might just do this today. Facebook dark post targeting certain CROs and see what happens. And I'll report back to you guys next webinar. So do you want to keep doing these every month?
Sure.
All right. So in the comments, let us know if you have any last-minute questions before we wrap up this webinar. And then let us know what you would like next month's webinar topic to be on. If you want us to continue on business development, or do you want us to talk more about negotiating contracts or finding PIs or recruiting patients? Every month we can have a different topic. And we just want to be able to provide as much value for you guys as possible. So if there aren't any more questions left, I'll leave this open for another minute. We will see you guys next month, okay? And stay tuned to the email for the alert, as well as all the social networks. Anything else you want to add?
Nothing I can think of, sorry.
Work with the SCS if you're interested, right? We can be your consultant.
Happily take your call. Answer any questions over the phone that you'd like.
We'll gladly do that, and we'll do month to month if you're
well, you don't have to go there. Whatever questions you might have, happy to answer.
Oh, of course. Yeah, send all your questions my way too. However, whichever ways you're comfortable, I get back to all of you guys. And let me know in the comments what you'd like the next webinar to be about. All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.